So I know I'm supposed to be in chapter 6 this morning, but there was one thing in chapter 5 on page 213 that we didn't get to last week. So let's look at page 213 and finish up last week and then focus on this learning chapter. I mean on the memory chapter coming up next. Have any of you ever heard of something called, well, it says on page 213, cognitive learning. Have you ever heard somebody look at you thinking and say, are the wheels turning? Well, that's probably related to this cognitive thinking kind of thing, like the cogs are turning around while you're processing information. And it says here on page 213 that mental activities such as attention. Have you ever been told to pay attention? Every time I hear that, I want to reach in my pocket and say, how much does it cost? No wonder I got in trouble when I was in high school and grade school. I just thought of snappy comebacks. No, you know what the teacher called it? Being a smart aleck. And I said, my name's Tom, not Alec. And that didn't go over either. I just was having a good time in life. And I kind of thought school was a place where I was incarcerated when I hadn't done anything wrong. So I was going to make the best of a bad situation. To think that I didn't like going to school, and then after I got saved at 18 and came to Bible college, to find out how God wanted me to live and how He wanted me to spend my life, to make up for lost time for not going to church and Sunday school all those years. After I graduate, He takes a guy who never liked school and does what? Puts him in school for the rest of his life. Called me to be a teacher. And I'm going, what? And then when I got there, I was having so much fun. I thought, well, it's more fun being on this side of the classroom than out there being told what to do. But the other thing it did for me, all of you who just love to learn and just apply yourself and give 100% all the time, keep going. But for those who weren't interested, I knew exactly how they felt. So I wasn't offended by them, and I could kind of relate to them. So I didn't have the same expectations for them that I had for others. But I tried to get them, look at this page 213, to think about where they were going to go someday in life and how what we're doing here could relate to that and help them do better of whatever they want to do, and try to help them learn how to remember things that are important and put those things to use in their future. Does anyone know why the people in the Old Testament were told to build these monuments? When God did something significant in their lives, they were told to kind of build a little monument. Do you remember? And God said, and when your children and your grandchildren ask you, what does this mean? Then you go back and rehearse the marvelous thing that God did in your life. Because you've got these monuments. I hope that you're kind of building some monuments in life, some things that say, this is something that I want to share with the next generation, and let them know how good God has been over the years. What did somebody say? This big hurricane stuff going on the East Coast. Somebody said, some news channel reported, some little kid asked his father, where was God when all of this was happening? And I wish I could have been there to talk to the little guy, because it's like somehow God's on trial here. And I would say, do you go to church every Sunday? And if he says yes, I say, so what have you learned about God in church? And then he starts telling me what he's learned. Then I'll build on that and talk to him about how in the Bible it says it rains on the just and the unjust. When we have a storm, God doesn't make the storm bypass all of us and just nail everybody else. When a hailstorm comes through and destroys the roof of everybody's house, now sometimes he does. It's like, well, why do you intervene for that person and not for me? And I'm thinking, sometimes we act like little children, don't we, when we talk to the creator of the universe, who is our Father. But remember, he is our Father, but he's also the creator of the universe. He's the author of our salvation, and he sent his only begotten Son to die on a cross. And let's kind of remember those things and watch out that we live in a society that's so self-serving that all they think about, what about me? What about me? And I tend to say, well, what about the claims that our Creator has on us? What about what God wants us to do? What about what are God's expectations for us? And all of that has to do with this excuse me, with this cognition stuff, with thinking about it. And one of the things that they mentioned on page 213, excuse me, that I think is really helpful is this thing about cognitive maps, where you have a map in your head. Sometimes you'll see it talked about as a schema, a pattern for thinking about things, a blueprint for how to do something. And you have a lot of them. You probably just don't stop and think about them because you've done these activities so often it becomes automatic. And one way to see how much capacity God has given us is to work with a little kid who hasn't learned these things yet and realize that that they're back at the beginning stages of things that you've got a handle on and have learned very well over the years. So, and not everybody has the same mapping capacities. I mean, some people, like if somebody said, where do you live? And I say, I live east of campus, about 4.5 miles. Does anyone see a picture of that in your mind? Here we are in this room, and that means I live that direction about 4.5 miles. You go, oh, is that east? Because you don't live with north, east, south, and west like someone who grows up in the country does. And then it's like 4.5 miles. How far is that? Because see, in my head, I have this picture, this map of driving down a road. You see them on the highway, don't you? When you're driving down the interstate, you see mile markers. Well, I see those mile markers, but the map in my head really shows little squares out in the country where you're driving down a road, and every so often you come to an intersection. And what is that intersection? You've gone a mile. So all those farmers out there, they live around the edge of a square mile. It's 1 mile wide, 1 mile long. Then there's a road that separates that square mile from the other square mile. And if you have ancestors who were homesteaders, then that means years ago the government said, we'll take 1 square mile and cut it in 4 pieces. And that would be 160 acres. And if you'll live on that little 1/4 of the square mile and build a house and raise some crops and stay there for 5 years, it's yours. We'll give you the title to the property and it's yours for the rest of your life. Wouldn't that be nice if they still did that today? I think they do some of that if you want to go up into Alaska in the wilderness area, but it used to be all across this country. There were all of these, that's why it's mapped out like it is, so that all these people could be farmers and own their own farm and not just work for somebody else. And that's why a lot of people in Europe who worked for other people came flying over here, because they said, in fact, some of them said, that just can't be true. And the people who got here said, yes, it is. I came here, lived 5 years, the farm is mine. All of their friends got on boats and came to America as quick as they could to get their own piece of this big hunk of real estate here called the United States of America. Okay, so with that in mind, if you're not sure about east and west and north and south and what 4.5 miles means, see, even in my head, in my little map, 4.5 miles. I had a good friend who lived 2 miles from my house. So I'd say to my mom, Mom, can I go up and visit with Jimmy for a while this afternoon? I got all my chores done. And she goes, yeah, I guess it'd be okay. If he lives 2 miles away, how long will it take me to walk that 2 miles to get to see him? Any idea? Anybody want to guess? A half an hour, 2 hours? What?
An hour.
An hour? And that, if that was the case, then if 2 miles in an hour, that would be 1 mile and 30 minutes. So I would be walking 2 miles an hour. That would be my rate of walking. If you go out and walk somewhere and clock off the distance you're walking and just walk a normal pace, you'll discover you have a certain kind of pattern, map for walking. That's a good cadence for you. And in my case, I could walk to his house in about 30 minutes. I could walk a mile in 15 minutes. You say 2 miles in 30 minutes? Yeah, that's like 4 miles an hour. Say, if someone's driving their car 4 miles an hour, could you walk alongside their car? You go, I don't know, I don't have a picture of that, a scheme for that in my head, or a map for that. So part of this cognition stuff is thinking about what we've constructed in our heads and then looking for ways to construct new things. In math class, we had some things we had to measure the other day. And I asked how many brought a ruler with them. Well, who brought a ruler to class? Nobody does. I said, okay, so I'll give you one. And I pulled out a 3x5 index card and gave everybody one and said, there you go. Now you have a ruler. You do? Have you ever looked at a 3x5 index card? It has lines on it. If it's 3 inches wide and it has 12 spaces, what does that mean? Every 4 spaces makes an inch. So you've got a ruler that measures to the nearest quarter of an inch just by having a 3x5 card in your pocket. And one of the online students said, wow, that's genius. Now, I would like to think that I'm a genius, but I know I'm not. I probably read that somewhere and just forgot where I found it. But, I mean, isn't it nice to know? Just like, do some of you know that you could, if you want to know how wide something is, you can put your hands out and go 6, 6, 6. So from here to here is 18 inches. Because you've put your hands on a ruler and you know how far it is from the end of your little finger to the end of your index finger. And you can just measure things with it and get a rough idea as to how wide things are. Am I the only one that does stuff like that? My wife says, yes, you are, Tom, and that makes you weird. Okay, enough of that. So have you heard of a guy named Benjamin Bloom and his educational taxonomy? He's put together a chart. Let me call it up here for you. And here's what I typed in. Oh, I have to turn it on, don't I, so you can see it. Here's what I typed in. If you want to find this on the internet, just type in educational taxonomies with examples. I mean, you can find a whole bunch of things about it, but educational taxonomies with examples. And there's 9 pages of stuff here. So let's just click on it and see. So in this cognitive domain, in the area of cognition and thinking, there are 6 kinds of maps or 6 kinds of cognition going on. Can you tell what the first one is? Can you read it there? Knowledge. And there's a big paragraph to explain it, but look at that brief description. What's the brief description? To recall something. Let's see how good you are at recall. Which direction do I live from campus?
East.
East. And how far away do I live?
4 miles.
How many recalled that? Oh, wow. So alert on a Monday morning. I'm impressed. But see, that's what it has to do with. That I hear something, I know something, I can recall it. Now, if I ask you on Wednesday which direction I live from class and how far away do I live, would you remember?
Yeah, because you made a point of saying.
All right, because it's like I repeated it, so you say, you know, he might ask me that. I'll jot something down and bring that with me on Wednesday because I'm doing some things to try to help myself retain that knowledge. I used to think years ago, before I started studying psychology, that my mind was like a big bucket and it only had a certain capacity. So I wanted to fill it up with useful information. I wanted to store a bunch of good stuff in there, to fill it up with useful knowledge. And a lot of stuff I heard at school I didn't think was useful, and I thought, don't put it in your bucket, it'll take up space that you need for other useful stuff. So I had an aversion to recalling what people told me in school. And they say, Tom, we talked about that. I'm going, I know, but I didn't want to clutter my mind with useless information. And that did not win any points with a teacher, does it? When they're talking about something that's important and you don't think it is. Well, guess what? Do any of you have a computer with a memory capacity that's so large that you will not be able to fill it up in your lifetime? Well, guess what you have on your shoulders? You know how they talk about computers work a lot like the mind, or the mind is like a computer? You have unlimited capacity for storing knowledge. So don't be afraid to store something that you think is useless. Just go ahead and put it in the useless file. But useless in parentheses also means might help me make a good grade in class. But then I didn't even care about good grades in class. Well, I did for a while when my mom said, Tom, you can do better than that in school. And I said, you think so, Mom? She goes, I'm sure you can. I know you're smart enough to make A's. And I'm going, really? She goes, yes. I said, I don't think so. And what I was thinking was, that's too much work. And who cares about a little funny shaped letter anyway? I mean, I don't think an A is all that good looking. I think H's look better than A's. If you asked me to have a beauty contest for the letters of the alphabet, A would not be the first one I would pick. I even think a C looks better than an A. And a B looks better than... I just don't like A's. I don't know why. They just aren't appealing to me. But my mom said, if you'll earn straight A's in school, I'll pay you a hefty reward. I'm going, that's good enough for me. I was always going to make a little money. So I started making straight A's. And then after a while she said, you know, see, I told you could make straight A's, so I'm not going to pay you anymore. Now you would think, once I had an appetite for making A's, I would keep it up. I was not the smartest cracker in the box. I said, if I don't get paid for it, why go to the trouble of doing it? Spend your time doing something else that's more useful from your perspective to you. So a lot of things about making grades in school I had to work at learning when I got to college because I didn't learn those skills through grade school and high school. And I don't think it's not because the teachers didn't try to teach it to me. I wasn't interested in learning that kind of thing. So what's going to happen here is when we get through with this chapter and go to the next one, I'm going to give you a whole bunch of I've got 3 handouts here that's going to help you understand how you can improve your ability to recall information that you're given so that you can do well on an exam or answer questions in a class discussion. Now, see, and what's neat about that, what I think's neat about this website here is it has a whole bunch of sample activities. So when you look through that list of sample activities, do I have them up there? When you look through that list of sample activities, you can start to see how you've already done a lot of things, like label the parts of a plant. So what does a tree have on it? A trunk. When I say trunk, you mean it has fastened to the side of it a little thing for storing stuff in it? No, that's a different kind of trunk. Oh, like a little thing that you pull a lever and it pops up and the tree comes open and there's a storage compartment? No, that's on a car. And look how we use the word trunk in so many different contexts. But the parts of a tree, it has a trunk. And then what else does it have?
Branches, leaves.
Branches, leaves. Roots. You see what's happening? So it's like you already know a lot of stuff about a lot of stuff. You just don't necessarily stop and think about it. And if we took time to run through all of these in detail, that's why just look them up on the internet and maybe print off these 9 pages just so you'll have a reference there to use this stuff in the future. What's the second one on this list of 6 domains? Comprehension. I can recall the verse. What was the one I gave you? Philippians 4:6 and 7. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything with prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. And what does it say next? And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will keep or guard or garrison about like a fort your heart and mind. Now, you could recall that verse and recite it to me, but do you comprehend what it's saying? If you do, then the next time you get anxious about something, you would probably recall that we did this little exercise in class and that you could go find that piece of paper. No, you just open your Bible to Philippians 4:6 and 7 and you read the verse and then you say, this is what I'm going to thank God for, and this is what I'm going to ask God to do about this situation, and I'm going to keep every day talking to Him about it until I'm not anxious anymore. And that means you comprehend what that verse, it's kind of like what's going on here. And what's the, again, see, you can look at the big paragraph, but see that is, what's that little word there that it's using for a short description? I understand it. Now, if you understand it well enough, you can explain it to somebody else. Are you ready for this? If I can't explain something to somebody, that indicates that I don't understand it as well as I thought I did. And you know what's the best way to gain a vibrant understanding of Scripture? To read it, to ask, what is God telling me to do here? And then to do it. When I used to teach Bible in a Christian school years ago, where students had to come to Bible class every day, I would study the lessons I was going to teach in advance, about 2 weeks in advance, so I had an opportunity to look at what is God telling us to do, and then I would practice it for a week, and then when we would come to class and I would teach it, I would give them a quiz over, can they recite the verse, can they recall what we're talking about, And then when we talked about it in class, I could give illustrations from what happened last week when I was putting this verse into practice. So my understanding was enhanced by my practicing what the Bible said to do. And that meant it was easier for me to explain it to them. You follow the rationale of what's going on here? Let's go to the third one. Application. Now, see, Bloom's taxonomy says that, okay, I can recite Philippians 4, 6, and 7, and I understand what it says, but have I applied it to my life? And what's your answer to that question? Have you applied Philippians 4, 6, and 7 to your life? When I gave those little white handouts, those little squares, did all of you at least once do that? If you did, then you've applied Philippians 4, 6, and 7 to your life. You follow that? Application just means I take what God says and I do something about it. Using the idea. And in the case of Philippians 4, 6, and 7, you say, well, doesn't that verse say, don't be anxious? I said, yeah. Well, I can't just not be anxious. Well, no, it's telling you don't be anxious, but rather do this, and then it tells you what to do to resolve your anxieties. And somebody said to me one time, can you do that with anything? Any kind of anxiety, no matter how intense it is? And guess what my answer was? Does Philippians 4, 6, and 7, this will work for little things, but for big things, you're just on your own? No, Philippians 4, 6, and 7 just says, you do this, and God will put a garrison about your heart and mind, and you'll find as you do that, as you apply that, that your anxieties diminish. No matter how big they were to start with, they'll be smaller a week later. And if it's still there and it's still bothering you, then hang on to the application for another week until you quit praying about it because you forgot about it because you're not anxious anymore. And here's what somebody said to me. You know, Tom, in a Sunday school class, I used to teach a class of old people, and I don't know why they used to, and that's when I was a lot younger. I said, I don't know why they want a young guy teaching them. They know so much more than I do. But I think part of it was because I emphasized this application stuff. And they said, Tom, sometimes you make things too simplistic. And I responded by saying, do I make things too simplistic, or do we complicate things more than God intended for us to do it? And that if we would just take His straightforward instructions on how to live and put it into practice, we would find solutions to life's problems. In other words, could life be a lot simpler than we've made it? That we've made it out to be a much bigger deal than it is from God's perspective? And we need to just back up a little bit and just apply the Word of God to our lives and watch God make life much simpler for us to live. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave Himself for it. I used to do seminars for married couples, and I love doing this. I would say, so what is the Bible? What's the biggest verse that the Bible addresses to men? And all these little ladies' voices would do, love your wives, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. Then I said, and what's the biggest Bible verse for women? And all these booming voices, wives, submit to your husbands. And I said, why are we memorizing each other's verses? I'm memorizing the girl's verse. The girls are memorizing the guy's verse. What's that all about? So we can beat each other over the head with it? That's not what the Bible was given for. Hey, let the women memorize the women's verses, and guys, let's memorize the men's verses. And then do what? understand what it means to love somebody as Christ loved the church? Well, I guess that means if we're ever attacked by a bunch of Roman soldiers, I'll stand right there and die for her. Well, that's great, but until the Roman soldiers show up and you have to face death to show you love her, what could you do in the meantime to show her you love her? If my wife doesn't like shopping and she doesn't want to get out of the house and go to the store to buy groceries, and I'm already here teaching, what would be a loving thing for me to do on my way home after class? Call my wife on the cell phone and say, Nina, is there anything you would like to have me pick up for you from the store? Oh, she says, Tom, aren't you tired from teaching? Yes, but that doesn't matter. I love you so much. No, just come on home. We can get it later. We can get what later? She goes, well, I don't want you to have to go to the store when you're tired. I said, I'm always tired. At my age, I wake up tired. And besides, and here's what I said, I've just been standing there talking. I need some exercise, walking up and down the aisles at the store. So what did you have in mind? And who knows, while I'm picking up what you want, I might even find a bargain. So I not only love her enough to do something that she doesn't want to do, but then I love her enough to make her not feel bad for asking me to do it. Now, to me, that's loving my wife as Christ loved the church. You understand? And I had a guy say to me one time, he said, well, Brother Tom, I'm here to tell you, my wife wouldn't want me doing the grocery shopping because she likes to do it herself. I said, well, good for you. You don't have to do that. Have you figured out what you could do to love your wife as Christ loved the church? And one guy said, I can't think of a thing. I said, well, if you're looking for suggestions, who would you suggest a husband go to find suggestions on what he could do to love his wife as Christ loved the church? His wife. Just ask her. And when I said that, a whole room full of men go, I don't think I want to go there. And then they wonder why their lives are so complicated. Because they're not taking a straightforward approach to life, just following the mandates, the directives, the commandments, whatever you want to call them. I do not like the idea that this is what God is suggesting we do. It's not a suggestion. I'm teaching my grandson how to drive, so I say, I suggest you drive on the right side of the highway, not on the other side. Well, that's a suggestion probably, but what if I want to drive on the other side? Well, let me out of the car so I'm not involved in a head-on collision that you're about to have. I mean, come on, these are not just a few suggestions God made. These are life and death issues. And he's telling us this stuff because he loves us and he wants to spare us a lot of grief. Well, enough of that. So, and see, there's a whole bunch of things here, a whole bunch of examples. I just love this page because it's full of all these sample activities. What's the fourth one?
Analysis.
Analysis. Now, again, you can read the whole paragraph, but look at the little parentheses for the description. What is analysis? Breaking things down. Okay, is the world full of problems today? Okay, let's take some problem in life and break it down into what's behind that problem. I mean, any of you work someplace at a store where people steal stuff all the time? And they have seminars on how to handle theft control and what not to do when someone's shoplifting and that kind of thing? You ever work someplace where they did things like that? And what I've been told is that most companies say, don't do anything about it. Just let them take it. And I'm going, let them take it? Well, why does that matter to you if they took it from the store? If everybody else is taken from the store and I'm the only guy paying, what's going to happen to the price of the stuff I'm paying for? It's going to go out of sight. Do any of you live close to a little store where kids steal a lot of stuff? The prices at that store are twice of what they are someplace else because they don't have theft control in place. And people know it and they go there and steal stuff. It's like, no. So you start to analyze what's going on in life. Why are we having all these problems? How come there wasn't as much stealing when you were a young man in grade school as there is today? And I say, I don't know. Let's analyze the classroom today and the one I grew up in. Are you ready for this? I went to a public school all my life till I graduated from high school, got saved at 18 and came to Bible college. And guess what was on the wall in every classroom? The 10 Commandments. And what would the teacher point out on a regular basis? If somebody stole something from somebody else at school, you know what? And watch this. Can you imagine? I'm a little kid sitting in grade school and some teacher says, you know what God says about stealing? Whoa! The God of the universe who created us and all this world and all these crops that we raise said something about stealing? I better listen to this. He says, thou shalt not steal. Gulp. You can do a lot of things, Tom, but if you go stealing stuff, you've offended the creator of the universe. Now that's a big ticket message, isn't it? So you understand? Well, yes, and that made you feel guilty about stealing, so you didn't do it? No, I did it once. Got caught. Whoa! I thought I was going to die. All I did in the grocery store was just pick up a piece of bubble gum, put it in my mouth and start chewing on it. And we get in the car and what does my little sister say? Tommy, where did you get the bubble gum? In the store. And my mom turned around and said, you didn't have any money. Did someone give that to you? Well, I saw other kids picking it up, so I thought it was free. That didn't fly. Well, it did. I mean, that didn't fly, but I did. All I know is that after those words came out of my mouth, my mom had me by the shirt, drug me over the seat, marched me back into the store. Have you ever been in one of those old stores where they had this counter where they went up to cash checks and things? She pulled me up to that counter, pushed me up against it and said, tell this man what you just did. And my throat is on that shelf and I'm thinking, I'm going to die. I'm going to die. She's going to strangle me right here at this counter. And I said, I stole some bubble gum and I'm very sorry. And she said, tell him you'll never do it again. And I'm going, I think I'm going to die. I'll never do it again. And he said, it's okay, it's okay. She said, it's not okay. And she's leaning on me, and I'm going, just cooperate with her so we can both get out of here alive. She gave him the penny for the money, for the gum, took me back to the car. Do you think that made a lasting impression on me? Yes. In modern politically correct language, she traumatized me. She traumatized me to such a point that when I got to be a teenager and my friends would go out and steal stuff, I couldn't do it. I would say, bye guys, I'm going home. And they'd go, pluck, 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 pluck. Everyone knows what that means, don't you? Chicken for not doing it. And I said, yeah, the difference is you steal and you go home, your parents don't care. I steal, I go home, I die. I've been down that road with bubble gum. So I'm not about to go to some farmer's tractor and siphon gas out of it because I don't want to buy gas to drive my car around town. And they all just laughed and said, chicken, chicken. And here I am still alive. And surprising enough, some of my friends in school are deceased or in jail. Wonder how that happens. Break things down. Break it down. Why did I end up where I am and they end up where they are? Analyze it. Analyze it. Break it down into pieces. Okay, what's the next one? Number 5. Synthesis. Once I break things down, then I start putting things back together. It's not God's fault that something tragic happens to us. The laws of nature were put in place. When those laws are broken, things fall apart. And the just and the unjust suffer equally. But let's put it together. God is our Father. No matter how bad the tragedy or the situation, what do we know? That our Heavenly Father cares more about us and our well-being than we care about ourselves. And that's what gives us a reason to live that other people seem to be oblivious to. I don't know, how do people live if they can't talk to God about their problems? They talk to their friends about it, and their friends say, yeah, I have the same problem, and so they sit around and drink themselves into a stupor so they don't have to feel bad about what's going on. No, just go to Scripture, go to the Lord and find out what He has to say about it. Number 6, evaluation. We need to do more of that in our society, just evaluating what's going on. And to me, the most evaluative question you can ask, and what does it say here for number 6? Judging. Judging. Oh, wait a minute. That's not politically correct either, is it? Don't judge anybody. Don't make a judgment about it. Well, you say you failed the test? Yes. Well, did you study? No, I didn't feel like it. Well, there you go. You brought that failing grade on yourself. You could have studied, but I didn't feel like it. Well, that's the whole next domain after cognitive. There are 2 other domains, and we won't even take time to talk about those because we're using way too much time for this, but there's the affective domain, the feeling, and the psychomotor. That would be the one where you learn how to ride a bicycle and dribble a basketball and make things with your hands, sew, and where it's just like it's mind-body stuff together. Walking, running, jumping. That's psychomotor. And then affective has to do with our affections, our feelings. And that's why in these 9 pages there's a whole section on those too. And is it fair to say that we're living in a world today that probably emphasizes the affective domain more than the cognitive domain? It's not a matter. That's truth to you, but it's not to me because I feel differently about it. Well, you can feel any way about it you want, but that doesn't change the facts. I mean, the truth is the truth. And if you violate the truth, you suffer the consequences. Don't be so judgmental. I'm just telling you the way life works. But see, that's what it says, making judgments about things. I wonder what would happen if I just called my wife when I left here and say, Nina, I bet you're wondering if I'm going to ask you if you want anything from the store. She goes, well, that's usually what you do. Well, guess what? I'm not making that phone call anymore. I'm sick and tired of stopping at the store. If you want some at the store, go get it yourself. I've been a loving husband long enough. I'm going to start doing what I want to do. You know what I tell the guys, to selfish guys? If you want to be selfish the rest of your life, don't get married. And if you want to get married, then realize that you're going to die to self, die to self, die to self on a weekly, daily, just regularly. You're just going to be dying to self. Preferring your wife's way above your own. Because you love her so much. And if you can't love somebody that much, then don't marry someone and bring your grief, your selfish grief, into their lives. But again, isn't that another thing that's going on in our world today? They're telling us to be politically correct, and they're also telling everybody to be selfish, to be selfish, to be selfish. Does anyone know the scriptural formula for joy? J-O-Y. Were you taught this anywhere? What?
It's Jesus, others, you.
Jesus is the J. Jesus first. Then what?
Others.
Others second. And what's the last one?
Yourself.
Yourself last. Well, I don't buy into that. Well, that's why you're having so many problems in life. How come I don't have any friends? I don't know. Do you show yourself friendly? What do you mean by that? Are you friends to other people? Why should I be friends to people if they're not friends to me? Have you figured out how life works? You're not the center of the universe. If you want friends, start being friendly. Well, You see what it means to evaluate things? And what's the criteria we use to evaluate the stuff we encounter in life? Don't you love asking this question? I wonder if the Bible says anything about that. And then you just put that question on a piece of paper and read through the Bible to find the answer. You say, well, that's takes way too much time. You know what's cool about being in college? 20 people could be sitting in a room saying, I wonder what the Bible says about that. And they all say, I don't know. So they can take the Bible and divide it into 20 sections, and each of them read 1/20th of the Bible and then come back a week later and share with each other what they found in the Bible about that question. And we could help each other learn to make good judgments in life. I like that word. I like that word. Oh, and now they come to the affective domain. Now you say, well, that talks about receiving stuff. Yes. If you don't like my tone of voice, you're not as prone to be receptive to what I have to say. If you don't like the way I dress, you're not as receptive to what I have to say. Okay, now let's spin it on the other side of the coin. If I can create a positive feeling between the two of us, this is what you learn in psychology. If we become friends, I can influence the way you think. This is how psychology. You see why every parent ought to take a class in psychology? So when they bring little children into the world, the children don't run their universe. They do. Because they understand how to make these things happen. Okay, that's obviously enough of that. Let's move on page 214. Have any of you ever had an insight? The bottom of page 214. Learning that occurs rapidly as a result of understanding all the elements of a problem. Okay, the place where I think I've seen that happen just recently is in math class. I'm teaching some stuff that a lot of people haven't seen for a long time, from since they were in grade school, and they go, I don't remember all this. What is this all about? And so I walk them through it 3 or 4 times and I show them how it works, and then they go, I see it. Have you ever had one of those moments in life? I see it. That's what this is talking about. It's like you've agonized over something, you've thought about it long enough, you've done enough cognition, the kind of things we just have been talking about, to where it all comes together and you see it. You say, aha, this is what's going on. This is the way it works. And those aha moments are so cool. Observational learning on page 216. That's just from watching other people. And, okay, now, did you ever get in trouble by just watching somebody do something and then do it? Yeah, I raised my hand. Stealing bubble gum. I saw another kid take one, so I thought it was okay to take one. That's just not smart. And it could lead to you having a permanent injury to your esophagus, to your windpipe, whatever. So, did any of you have an older brother or sister that you watched get in trouble and made a mental note? Bad idea. Don't do that one. Yeah, you learn from observing. Some of us learn to tie our shoe by just watching others tie their shoe. Probably what happened is while my parents were teaching my older brother how to tie his shoe, I was watching, so I thought I'll just do it myself. I don't need any help. So you can learn from observing. I'm driving down the road taking my grandson home, and he's in a hurry to get there, so maybe I'll just kick it up and drive 10 miles over the speed limit. Not if you're driving down 50 highway going through Lone Jack. You drive down 50 highway through Lone Jack, there's a Lone Jack policeman who pays for the policeman's Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners by stopping people on 50 highway and giving them tickets. Well, he doesn't just stop anybody, he just stops the people who are driving too fast. And when we're driving down there, and I say to my grandson, I know you're in a hurry to get home, but The reason I've got my cruise control set on 65 is because, watch. And he says, yep, I'll bet he said, I see that red light up there. I'll bet the lone jack policeman has pulled somebody over and given him a ticket. And who did he pull over? The guy who was driving too fast. Because he thought they don't enforce the speed limit on 50 highway. Maybe they don't from Lone Jack to Warrensburg, but when you get to Lone Jack, I'm just telling you, slow down or you'll pay $100. And I don't know how long you have to work to earn $100, but I work too hard for my $100 bills to pass them out to a policeman for going 10 miles over the speed limit. So just watch and learn and observe from that. And I watch the news and I hear about road rage. Somebody honked at a guy. He got out and shot at his car. I'm thinking, no more honking at people for me. I don't want a hole in my car. And it tells you something about the state of the society we're in. There's one thing I put a star by on page 217. It talks about Bandura and others who stress that human beings are capable of setting performance standards for themselves and then rewarding themselves for achieving or failing to achieve, punishing themselves for those standards. Have you ever done that? Have you ever set a standard for yourself and then when you reach it, you give yourself a reward? It works, doesn't it? I mean, it's an incentive that works for us. And if you don't reach your objective, then you punish yourself. It's just so cool how we can mess with our own heads as well as other people's. Okay, now we're ready for chapter 6, which we should have started a few minutes ago. But that's okay. We're going to make this stuff work. Memory on page 225. Bottom of the page, next to the last paragraph. Today, many psychologists find it useful to think about memory as a series of steps in which we process information. Now, it says, much like a computer stores and retrieves data, but with your computer. Now, see, it used to be, there's only one way to get data into my computer, and that's what, type it on the keyboard. Now, how many ways do you have to input data into your computer? You can type it on a keyboard. You can do what else? You can write with a stylus on your tablet. What else can you do? Can you talk to it? So see, you've got 3 techniques, so to speak, for putting data into your computer so it can process it. Well, there's a whole bunch of techniques that we can use for, and we've got a lot more options than just those 3, but there's a whole bunch of techniques we can use to input information into our minds so that what are we trying to do here? We're trying to remember it. We're trying to remember it. Now, just like, I don't know if you've ever done this, have any of you looked at a phone number and then looked at your phone and started going doop, 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 and you forgot the last 3 digits, so you went back over there, and by the time you look at it, it goes bloop, shuts down on you, so you have to start all over again? Okay, so what I was doing was looking at it. I was visually looking at it. I suppose that would be like I put something on my printer and scan it and input it into my computer. I look at the number and I scan it with my eyes. Then I look over here and start punching in the buttons, and by the time it's almost like the information is starting to evaporate as soon as I turn my eyes away. And so by the time I start punching the buttons, by the time I get to the last 3 digits, it's evaporated. So what can I do to make it stay long enough to evaporate more slowly and stay long enough so I could remember long enough to get all the digits in? I look at the number, I go, oh, it says 816-697-5432. Now, what happens? 816, what did I say?
697.
697, what?
5432.
See what happens when you say it out loud? It's like I look at it and say it out loud, so I hear myself, I see it and I hear myself I hear it as well as see it, and that makes it stick long enough where I can come over here and type it in the phone and never have that happen again. Isn't this stuff useful? You can do that with so many kinds of things. I called my wife and said, "You need anything in the store?" She goes, "Yes, I'm glad you called. I'm out of this and this and this." And I go, "Wait a minute." I pull out an index card out of my pocket or out of my little slot in the car, and I say, "I better write this down. Let me pull over up here to this and side of the road and write down what you want." "No, I'll just call you back when I get to the store. Then you go ahead and make your list, and then in the parking lot, I'll call you again and write the list down." If it's 3 things, I can usually remember it. If it's 4 things, sometimes I remember, sometimes I don't. If it's 5 or more, I know I need to write it down or I'll forget it. Now see, what's happened is I've observed my own personal memory capacities. And I don't have a photographic mind. Do any of you know somebody who has a borderline photographic mind? We had a guy work here years ago. It was so cool. He would look at your pictures in the yearbook, and then when you came back to school, he could have a class with 50 people in it, and he could call everyone by name. But he kept calling one guy by the wrong name all the time. Any idea why? In the yearbook, they had the wrong name under his picture. A misprint in the yearbook. And he had a photographic like mine, so he just had that fixed there. I don't even come close to that. I am so far away from a photographic mind, it's embarrassing. So what do, Tom? Feel guilty and wonder if maybe you shouldn't be working here with men with photographic minds? I'm going, no. I just do a different kind of thing than they do. And here's my favorite Bible verse for all the people who have skills that I don't have. To whom much is given, what does the Bible say? Much is required. So he doesn't require me to call you all by name the first day of class, because God knows I am just so forgetful. I forget. I have 2 daughters, and sometimes I forget their names. You say, well, you know what that says about your relationship to your daughters? I know what some psychologists say it says about it, but it's just not true. And I've done all the things you're supposed to do to remember names, and they still get away from me. You understand what I did in here to begin with? Because see, a class this size, I ought to learn your names. So I put where you come from geographically to try to help me do that. You find some of these techniques for learning how to process information. And then it says steps, because sometimes you do 1, 2, 3 things. Like 1, I look at the number. Then 2, I say it out loud. Then 3, I punch it as fast as I can. So because I know I've got a little picture in my head of this number's evaporating, and if you don't get it down fast, it's going to be gone. The second thing on page 225 is the last paragraph. Far more information bombards our senses than we can possibly process. So the first stage of information processing involves selecting some of this material to think about and remember. Therefore, we turn first to the sensory registers and to attention, the process that allows us to select incoming information for further processing. So what am I paying attention to while I'm standing here reading this information to you? I mean, my ears are collecting what kind of information? Auditory. My eyes are collecting visual information. And I'm being bombarded with it. But what am I giving the most attention to? These registers are like waiting rooms in which information... Now see, this is a picture. They're trying to draw a picture of how this stuff works. Raw information flows from your senses into what are known as sensory registers. These registers are like waiting rooms in which information enters and stays for only a short time. I walked in there this morning and it was cold in this room. And I looked over here and I'm going, whoa, the thermostat's been turned way down all weekend. So I popped it back up a little bit. And it was so quiet and peaceful in here. It's not quiet and peaceful anymore. Can you hear this thing running over there? It seems so loud to me. Now watch. The more I focus my attention on that, the louder the sound. It sounds louder. I mean, it's the same. It's the same magnitude, but it's like now I'm giving it more attention. So I'm tuning into it and I'm focusing my attention that direction. If, as I said, if I open the blinds, well, when I first come in here, the sun shining in the windows, it would hurt your eyes. But now if I open the blinds, there would be so much visual data if we looked out there that if I said, just turn and look out the window and I'll keep talking to you and we'll see how much of what I say sticks with you. You understand what happens? One time, I had a class that talked me into going outside to have class outside. I thought, why not? A little change of pace won't hurt anything. It's like, Tom, think about it. if I had thought about what does psychology tell you, when we got outside and we're sitting out there after a long winter and all this beautiful spring weather, and I start talking about psychology, where is everybody's attention going? To the beautiful spring weather. And I said, well, that was a disaster. They said, no, that was fun. I said, yeah, but what I mean is we didn't have psychology class today. We had let's enjoy the out of doors. So if I want you to think about what I'm saying and concentrate on it and focus on it and try to understand it and comprehend it and all that kind of stuff and even recall it later when it comes test time, I need to put you in an environment that says that minimizes distractions would be one of the things that it talks about. And that's one of the things it tells you to do, minimize distractions. So it talks about the visual registry, the eye stuff. I'm driving down the road and I see something interesting along the side of the road and I turn to look at it, and where does my car end up while I'm turning my head sideways to look at something on the side of the road? Uh-oh, what happened there? You weren't keeping your eyes focused and the car's kind of going the direction where your eyes are going. I'm thinking there would be fewer accidents if we didn't have all these billboards that attract our attention and distract us from focusing on driving. And what do you think happens? There's a traffic jam, cars are backed up. Have you ever been on a 4-lane highway when you actually had to stop your car because the traffic was backed up so much? It feels so awkward. The people behind you who aren't paying attention, they never stop on an interstate, right? And that's why they're pulled over with the front of their car all smashed in because they ran into the back of another car because they weren't watching. So what do I do to avoid that? I keep a substantial distance between me and the car in front of me when I'm driving. Do the rest of you do that? And what happens? Because I leave so much space, people keep pulling over and crowding in front of me, and I have to back up a little more and back up a little more because I can't comfortably drive on somebody's bumper thinking that what if a dog jumped out in the street? They would hit the brakes to avoid the dog, and by the time I hit my brakes, it's too late. Bang! The reaction time and the distance covered, see, the math involved, would be such that I would hit them before I could hit the brake. So I just keep a substantial distance between me and the guy in front of me. I'm paying attention, as it says on page 227. I'm trying to be attentive to what's going on. And part of paying attention is being selective as to what incoming information you give priority to. Now, on page 228, it talks about, in the middle of the page, something we've discussed earlier. Suppose you're at a restaurant and there's a conversation at another table and someone mentions your name, that would be the same in the cafeteria. We talked about that. You're blocking out all those conversations, you're minimizing that and maximizing the person you're sitting across from. Then you hear your name, and all of a sudden you start dividing your attention, and you're not hearing as intently the person across the table from you. And what are some of the techniques that I can use to strengthen the attention that I'm giving to the person I'm talking to? To repeat back to them what they said to me. Did you say da-da-da-da-da-da? Yes, I did. Oh, well, here's what I think about that. Now, watch. When I say, did you say da-da-da-da-da? And they say, yes, I did. Now you understand how they realize that I caught all the words they said, and I said those words back to them. So now they're being more attentive to what I say, and I say, well, here's what I think about that. And then they're listening to what I think about it, because often in conversation, we call it conversation, put that in quotes, we just take turns talking at each other. You know, while the other person's talking, I'm thinking of what I'm going to say next. And while I'm talking, they're thinking of what they're going to say next. And we're not really listening to each other. And it doesn't hurt to learn some of these exercises and practice some of this stuff on learning how to be more attentive to the people I'm talking to. Eye contact. That makes you nervous. Remember, what do you look at if you don't want to get nervous? The tip of their nose, their chin, their ear, their eyelashes, their eyebrows. Pick something that makes you smile, because then when you're talking to me and I'm smiling, the attention thing, it makes for a stronger attention bond. Isn't it fun learning this stuff? Go out and try it with somebody and see what happens. Page 229 gets into some of the technical side of it. Short-term memory, long-term memory, capacity. I mean, see, you can do a little quiz down there. You can read those, like number 1, CXW. Now, see, I saw it, I said it out loud. Can we all say it together? CXW. Now let's jump down to number 5. EGQWJPBRHKA. EGQ WJP. See, I started to say WP something. Okay, so now did you notice what I was doing, that big list? Did you see me go EGQWJP? I was breaking it up in chunks. Guess what that's called? Chunking. That's what it's called. In other words, when you're trying to remember a list of stuff, you chunk stuff together. That's why it's easy to remember your Social Security number. That's why the Social Security Agency has it broken up. I mean, how's your number broken up? 441-44-6320. I mean, that's mine. Isn't yours broken up the same way? 424. No, 324. Yeah, 324. But that chunking process helps you remember things. Now that you know that, you can use chunking to remember things. And see, if we started and took the time to go from 1 through 5, we would discover that each of us has a different capacity. We can all do number 1, but as it expands, then you say, okay, I know I can remember 3 or 4 things that my wife wants from the store. If it gets to be 5 or more, I write it down. And so I says, well, I'm better than you. I can remember 6 or 7 before I have to write it down. Well, that's great that you can remember that, but why does it make you better than me? Oh, because the guy who can remember the most is the better person. So the guy with the photographic mind is a better person from God's perspective. You know, can you believe I used to think this? That God likes taller people better than others. Now, why would I think that?
Closer to heaven? I don't
Because
know.
I'm tall, that's why. And I never even realized how important being over 6 feet tall was to me till I've been 6'1". all my life. I mean, since I was in high school. I went to the doctor and they said, and 6'1" is how many inches? 6 feet would be
72.
6 times 12, 72.
Yeah.
So that makes me 73 inches tall. And I go to see the doctor one time for a checkup, and they put that little thing up there, and she goes, "You're 72 and a half inches tall." I said, "I'm 73 inches tall." She goes, "Well, not according to this." And I said, "Well, then your machine is broken." And I thought, why am I so testy about being 73 inches tall? Because I just think being tall is better. I mean, that's just depravity, isn't it? That's all it is. It's just depravity. And it's like, no. I have a brother-in-law who's really short. And tall people make jokes about short people, right? And short people make jokes, "What's the weather like up there?" Make jokes about tall people. It's like we're all so childish at times about this stuff. And it's like, don't go comparing yourselves with one another in terms of these capacities. Just say, I'm going to learn what capacities I have. And by the way, someday down the road, when you have a family, you have children, don't compare your children. One of my daughters said to me early in school life, she goes, "What's wrong with me, Dad?" I said, "I don't know if there's anything wrong with you. What are you talking about?" She goes, "My older sister makes straight A's and I can't." I said, "Well, there's nothing wrong with you. It's just the way God wired you." She goes, "What are you talking about?" When you go to school, okay, when my youngest daughter went to school, she had trouble listening to what the teacher said because she was so busy listening to everyone's whispers in the room to know what everybody else was saying. What was the most important person? What was the most important thing in her life? Her relationship with the other students. What was the least important relationship in the classroom? Her relationship with the teacher. She's a very social person. The oldest daughter wanted to be a teacher from the time she was a little kid, so she focused on teachers and tried to emulate them. And of course, if the youngest one is socially attentive, when the teacher wants you to pay attention to them, and you're being socially attentive, okay, and guess where this first showed up? In grade school, when the teacher, did any of you have a teacher who had reading groups where you go sit on a little fuzzy rug in a circle and you're rubbing shoulders with your best friends while you're listening to them read a book? You did not hear a word they read from that book because you were getting all of your attention, giving all of your attention to the warm, fuzzy friends on both sides and the warm, fuzzy rug we're sitting on. You understand? And so my daughter couldn't pass the quizzes over the reading. And I said to her, I said, that's because you're so socially tuned in. God has given you a lot of social intelligence. When we talk about that, and we talk about Gardner's different kinds of intelligence, and your sister wants to be a teacher, so she's already tuned into all that. There's nothing wrong with you. You're just wired differently. And my wife and I are wired differently, and so we talk about those differences. But don't go around saying one's better than the other. God didn't make any junk. He made us all pleasing in His sight. And we ought to be the person that God wants us to be and not try to be like somebody else. So if your capacity for that sequence stuff is shorter than others, don't worry about it. And if it evaporates quicker than others, don't worry about it. Just say, hey, I know who I am. I understand this stuff. If I know that I forget stuff easier than other people do, then if somebody else has to rehearse it 3 times for an exam, and I know it's an exam on a lot of recall, what will I have to do? Rehearse it 6 times or 9 times? You follow me? And by the way, not just 9 times. Like if they have to study for 30 minutes, then I'll have to study for 60 minutes or an hour and a half. Now, what'll happen is, if somebody else can study for the test and make 100 by just looking at the material for 30 minutes, I'll probably have to look at it for an hour, but I won't look at it for a complete hour. I'll look at it for like 10 or 15 minutes. And you find the unit that works for you, then come back and look at it again, and look at it again, and look at it again. And there are even techniques. Have you ever studied for a test and you had 5 pages of notes, and when you took the test, you remembered the first 2 pages and the last 2 pages, but the middle page went blank? Well, guess what? That's a psychological phenomenon. It's called the serial position effect. And once I read about that, I go, oh, that's what's happening. And you can Google that and read about it. And the way to overcome it is the first time I study my notes, I start with page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then I put page 1 at the back. The next time I study 2, 3, 4, 5, 1. The next time I study, I go 3, 4, 5, 1, 2. You see what's happening? I keep moving the information around so nothing gets locked in the middle where it'll tend to be forgotten or evaporate. And I even had a professor at the university in my doctoral program. He said, Tom, this puzzles me. I look at your GRE score and you're smart, but you're struggling with my test. And I just said, I don't do well on tests. He said, do you know why? And I said, not exactly. He said, well, let's talk about this test I just gave and why you checked the answers you did. And I'm telling him why I checked the answers I did. He said, Tom, you read way too much into these questions. He said, I didn't put a lot of thought into this. I just kind of threw it together. You just threw the test together? That's going to tax my mental abilities? He said, just don't read too much into it. And I'm going, I'll try that on the next test. And sure enough, I just said, remember, he just threw this test together. So don't get bogged down in it. And bingo, what happens? My grade goes up on the test. All because one professor pointed out something. Oh, and by the way, you know why he thought I was smart? The graduate record exam that I took to get into school has 2 parts to the test. One part is math. I'm a math teacher. And the other part was English. Well, I'm poor in English, but I studied for that part. So if I studied for the English part and I aced the math part pretty much, you understand what that does when they put my scores together? It makes all my professors at the university think I'm smart. And my wife says, if only they would ask your mother and your wife. They would know the truth. Okay, so here's short-term memory. And on page 231, it talks about how your short-term memory encodes stuff. That's kind of like knowing how a computer works, but you don't have to know that stuff to just use it. Just remember that the short-term memory stuff, think of it as stuff just evaporates. Stuff just disappears very quickly. That's why page 232 talks about long-term memory, where you want to get it stuck in the long-term place in your head. And we'll pick up there on Wednesday. I'll save my handouts for then.